Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. On this week's World Have Your Say, we're going to talk about Dr Shakeel Afridi. This week he was found guilty by a Pakistani court of treason and sentenced to over 30 years in prison. His crime was to take part in the CIA operation to try and catch Osama Bin Laden. But did he really betray Pakistan, and has President Obama now let him down by allowing him to be in prison? Wherever you're watching, we're live and you're very welcome to take part. Now, it is worth mentioning that such is the outrage in Washington at Dr Shakeel Afridi's conviction that $33 million of aid from the US to Pakistan is being withheld on the condition that that will remain the case until he is released. That decision was taken on Thursday afternoon. Now, let me introduce you to our first three guests. Ayesha Chowdhury is a freelance journalist in Lahore. Malou Innocent is a policy analyst at the Cato Institute. And we also have Shahzadi Beg, a British Pakistani barrister who's live with us from London. Welcome to all three of you. Malou, let me start with you. Do you think that this was a correct conviction and a fair sentence?
I don't necessarily think so at all. In fact, the United States and Pakistan have sort of relied on one another to combat terrorists, but the problem lies in how we define terrorists or who we define as terrorists. And I think right now what we see within Pakistan is that there's a great deal of anger and anti-American sentiment as a result of the instability that's flowing over from neighboring Afghanistan into Pakistan. But with this conviction, what really it sort of is perversely sort of viewed as is Pakistan sort of aligned with the very militants, including Al-Qaeda, that the United States has been combating for the past 11 years. You had Secretary of State Hillary Clinton calling the sentencing unjust and unwarranted. You had top senators Carl Levin and John McCain saying that this was outrageous and that Pakistan should pardon him or free him. So this is going to be yet another contentious row within the relationship, and something that honestly U.S. and Pakistani officials have been dealing with for several years.
What about you, Shahzadi?
Well, my view is that the Americans would have known, of course, after the Bin Laden raid, that there was going to be a massive fallout with the Pakistani authorities. And it is very curious, in my view, that Dr Afridi was left, he wasn't taken away by the Americans. Presumably, at some point, they could have done that. I also think it is rather odd that he was tried under the tribal law when there are perfectly good regular courts in Pakistan where he could have been tried. He was instead tried under the Frontier Crime Regulation, which is a very old law, presumably because it has a charge of treason. He wasn't allowed access to lawyers, as I understand, but his fate was decided by tribal elders in Bara because he was posted to Khyber, although the treasonable act, as it were, took part in Abbottabad.
Shahzadi, thank you very much indeed. Malou, you were talking about Hillary Clinton. In a moment, I'll play all of you watching what she's had to say about this. But first of all, Ayesha in Lahore, what's your view of the conviction and the sentence?
Here in Pakistan, you know, the U.S. and Pakistan relationships seem to hit rock bottom each day. And this is yet again another example of how worse it can get every day. People here are not fond of intelligence agencies, and his conviction, quite frankly, doesn't necessarily mean anything for the common man and woman in Pakistan. People here didn't believe that Osama Bin Laden was even present in Abbottabad. And in Washington, you have a different perspective. So how you juggle both of those is really interesting and quite difficult.
Well, you mentioned the different perspective from Washington, D.C. This is Hillary Clinton's view of the sentence.
We regret both the fact that he was convicted and the severity of his sentence. His help, after all, was instrumental in taking down one of the world's most notorious murderers. That was clearly in Pakistan's interests, as well as ours and the rest of the world.
Well, I'd like to hear all three of you talk about this. Perhaps, Ayesha, you could lead us off. It may have been in Pakistan's interest to see Bin Laden dead, but this gentleman, a Pakistani national, was working for America without telling his own country, and that surely is against the law and worthy of punishment, Ayesha.
Yes, here in Pakistan, they're very sensitive about their sovereignty. So you have to keep that in mind. You have someone who's a Pakistani working for the CIA, in their eyes, against Pakistan. And obviously, they're not going to be very welcoming of him or any other actions like these in the future.
Malu?
Yeah, I think your guest in Lahore raises a very interesting point. I think the issue goes beyond Bin Laden. It's the issue of sovereignty and the feeling over the past several years that the United States, whether that be the CIA or private military contractors, operate within Pakistan with impunity. We saw the Raymond Davis affair, in which a former CIA agent who was working for a private military contractor shot and killed 2 Pakistanis who were believed to be ISI agents who were on his tail. That sort of inflamed this even more. You see the hot pursuit military raids by NATO into Pakistani territory, which again inflames public sentiment and public animosity against the United States. So it sort of goes beyond the Bin Laden issue, even though that was the right sort of raid to go after. It was right to go after Bin Laden. But I think, again, it's sort of the views from within Islamabad versus Washington. I mean, these are very sort of very difficult issues and concerning sovereignty, concerning the sort of humiliation of constantly being sort of overrun, the drone strikes which have quadrupled under the Obama administration. So these sort of things must be understood within a broader context of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship and its slow and gradual deterioration.
Shazadi?
Yes, I agree with both of the speakers. Sovereignty is a very sensitive issue in Pakistan, and I also agree that after the Raymond Davis affair, what was in fact exposed from that was that there were very different rules of engagement being conducted by both countries. And it also exposed the sheer number of people that were actually working for the CIA and the number of CIA contractors, which were unknown to Pakistan, which were operating in the country. I also agree with the views expressed that since the Bin Laden raid, the relationship between the US and Pakistan has gone down steadily, and more sharply, I would say, probably in this year. And I think that the doctor's case, Dr. Afridi's case, should really be seen against that backdrop, that you have a very difficult relationship, one of mistrust. Although it has to be said that how long this bloody war of attrition between Pakistan and the US can continue is really anybody's guess. I think that the time may come when both countries will have to sit up and stop playing to the gallery and actually deal with the crisis and the issues which are present, which range from the NATO supply route to the coalition support funds, which is again a very sensitive issue. Pakistan says they are. But
Shahzadi, let me just come in here, because you're looking at very broad issues, and of course it's important that we do that. But many people in America and elsewhere are expressing outrage that this man has been prosecuted and sentenced to a long prison term. But there are clear parallels with people, Americans, who have been caught spying for foreign powers in America and who are currently in American jails. So do you not think this outrage coming from Washington is hypocritical?
I think there are a lot of people that are going to say this is very rich indeed coming from the Americans against the background of extraordinary rendition, when people have been taken from various countries, tortured in third countries, and due process of law was completely ignored. And these voices are being raised in Pakistan, they're being raised outside Pakistan as well. And I think the other matter in relation to Dr. Afridi, which is slightly been overlooked, is that one of the perhaps the bigger crimes that he committed is the fake vaccination program, which is now going to have repercussions for many years to come, and will no doubt indirectly lead to the death of many children who will not be immunized for perfectly preventable diseases. And
just to explain to those of you watching who haven't been following all the details of his case, he set up a fake vaccination program in the hope that he could get a DNA reading from some of the children in the Bin Laden compound, and that was in turn hopefully going to be giving them a confirmation that the children were related to Osama Bin Laden. We don't actually know if he managed to get any accurate information, but he was certainly trying. We're getting calls here from Nigeria, Cameroon, Gabon and Ireland. Please do keep those calls coming. You can also get us on Skype, BBC_WHYS. Here's a message from Janina in the States posting on Facebook. Who could imagine that Pakistanis would try this heroic doctor? It only proves that they were protecting this mass murderer. How is working against Osama a betrayal of Pakistan? I hope we are working on freeing the doctor? Well, I think it probably is a fair assumption that there is some diplomatic activity, but this doctor is caught up in a very difficult relationship between these two countries. Now, let's bring in one more guest to add to the three we're already speaking to. Saad is with us on Skype from Islamabad. Hi, Saad. Do you see the doctor here in this case as a hero?
Well, actually, I don't. I see him as a very small part of a very complex operation. I mean, considering the fact that this operation, the raid did in fact take place, the Americans did in fact land in Pakistan. They took out Osama Bin Laden or not, whichever story you might agree with. But as a matter of fact, the Pakistan army and the Pakistani state have not come up with an explanation of the entire event of their own. The Osama Bin Laden Commission has not yet released its report, and you can already see the doctor getting punished for an act which has not even been explained to the Pakistanis themselves. And secondly, at the same time, no effort has been made on part of the government in Pakistan to actually come up with an explanation on how Osama Bin Laden managed to stay in Pakistan for that long, or how did he manage his ways around the country during all of that time. As far as the punishment of the doctor is concerned, I would say that it has to happen that way. I mean, you have to set up a precedent that no individuals in a country should be allowed to work for foreign intelligence services. It just cannot happen. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter whether he was doing a good thing or not. As long as he was conspiring against the state of Pakistan and working for a foreign intelligence agency.
Well, so that is a fascinating point. And I wonder, those of you around the world, whether you agree with that actually the fact this was aimed at catching Osama bin Laden is perhaps a distraction. Isn't the simpler point that if you work for a foreign power without telling your own country you're doing it, you can expect to be punished? Saad, thank you for speaking to us over the net on Skype. Those of you watching, if you'd like to call us that way, our address is BBC_WHYS. Now, when you phone us up on World Have Your Say, you go through to the World Have Your Say newsroom. Jill McGivering is there with the team helping to take your calls. What are we hearing, Jill?
A lot of passionate opinions so far, I can tell you, and pretty much divided. Quite a lot are supporting the US decision to cut aid. Some of them sounding fed up with Pakistan, basically accusing Islamabad of not doing enough to tackle terrorism, being part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And a sense that if they're going to take the money, they need to do something in return. They need to give political backing. They need to give more cooperation. But some are critical of both countries. Rana got in touch to say it's time that countries understood that aid does come with certain responsibilities. And some people who are angry about the US cuts, saying that aid should be separate from political rows, and they're worried about what the cuts will mean for development and for people who need it. Roz.
Thank you very much indeed, Jill. The number to ring wherever you're watching is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. If you come on the air, don't worry, we'll phone you back and pick up the bill. We're talking about the case of the Pakistani doctor who worked with the CIA to help the Americans find Osama bin Laden. He's been found guilty of treason by a tribal court in Pakistan and will serve at least 30 years in prison. Is that what he deserved? And should the Obama administration have done more to prevent him going to jail? You can tweet us using the WHYS hashtag. We have calls coming in from Liberia, Pakistan and Mauritius. I'm curious to ask Aisha, who's still with us from Lahore, and the word hero is coming up a lot, Aisha. Do you see Dr Afridi as a hero to you?
To me, when I talk to people on the ground, no, because I think after Raymond Davis, anyone who's affiliated with the CIA is not a hero to most Pakistanis. It doesn't really matter what they're doing. Most people have a very, very negative perception of CIA and any contract workers that work with them.
Thank you very much. You're in Lahore. Malu, you're following us from Washington, D.C. Should we be labelling this man a hero, a man who took fake blood tests to help with the vaccination program?
He certainly is a hero. I think it's interesting. It's either he's a treasoner or he's a hero. But I think overall, when we look at the assistance that we've been giving to Pakistan, I'm surprised that, you know, this isn't understood within the broader background of whether we've actually achieved our goals with the Pakistanis in terms of counterterrorism. Certainly, the Pakistanis have assisted us with the arrest and seizure of Khalik Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shib, and a number of top al-Qaeda leaders. But when it came to the killing of Osama bin Laden, there's debates in terms of whether or not the Pakistanis knew he was there, number one, and number two, whether or not the Pakistanis behind the scenes colluded with the United States and allowed the United States to go into the region with the various helicopters to go after OBL and go after him and take him out essentially, and not actually go after Dr. Afridi himself. I'm surprised that what your guest in Lahore had mentioned, that the United States didn't try and save Dr. Afridi, didn't try, and especially with the Chinese dissident a couple weeks ago, the row over that. I'm surprised that the United States didn't try and salvage him or give him some sort of a political cover, a diplomatic cover, to whisk him away to the United States.
Well, you're right. That Chinese dissident in question, who turned up at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, was offered a place at a U.S. university, and the Chinese had agreed to let him travel to do that. That actually hasn't happened yet. We don't really know the circumstances in which the Americans dealt with this doctor in the weeks after Osama Bin Laden's death. But what we do know is that he didn't leave Pakistan, ended up on trial, and will now begin a very long prison sentence. Calls coming in from Sweden, Afghanistan and Malaysia. I've got two particular questions for you. Do you see this doctor as a hero, and do you support the Americans withholding those $33 million of aid? Two questions for you. You can call us up, the numbers on the screen throughout the show, or tweet us using the WHYS hashtag. Now, we've got a guest joining us from Ontario in Canada. Andrew Lawton is editor-in-chief of the Landmark Report. Andrew, good to have you on the program. Quickly tell us what the Landmark Report is, and then give us your view on this doctor's sentence.
Well, Landmark Report's an online news, politics, and entertainment publication, and it's great to be back on the program. You know, I think it's absolutely despicable that this man is even being punished. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions, and we heard this from your guests earlier, is that the attack on Bin Laden was an attack on Pakistan. No, no, no. The United States is not in a war with Pakistan. Is it in a war against terrorism? And anyone who's not going to stand with the U.S. and stand with this doctor in terms of the fight against terrorism is just as good as the terrorists. And I think this man should be saved, and I think it's an abomination that Barack Obama has not stepped in to do something about this yet.
Malou, do you think President Obama has something to apologize for here?
Well, again, I'm sort of shocked.
I don't actually care if he apologizes or not. I think he needs to step in and do whatever he can, throw around whatever diplomatic muscle he can to get this doctor to safe ground. This doctor is a hero. Regardless of what laws he broke in Pakistan, if any, he is a member of the global fight against terror, and that should be commended. He should not have to go through a punishment for this.
Malou?
Yes, I mean, I think it is an abomination, and I think it's interesting, again, in lieu of the recent event with the Chinese dissident, that the State Department didn't do everything in its power to sort of whisk Dr. Afridi away and bring him into exile and sort of shelter him for his deed. I mean, he really put his life on the line. He certainly put his medical career on the line, and now, of course, he's going to be sentenced for 33 years. We don't know now if the $33 million that is going to be withdrawn from USA to Pakistan will actually achieve anything in terms of either cutting back that sentence and cutting back that conviction, and whether they'll actually be pardoned by the Frontier Crimes Regulation.
Malou, thank you very much indeed. You're in Washington, D.C. Some of you watching are in Dominica, South Africa, Ethiopia, Iraq, Somalia, and Canada. Thanks for your calls. We'll get some more of you on the air as we go along. You can also email worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. I'm particularly keen to hear from those of you in Pakistan. How do you view this Pakistani doctor? Did he betray your country? Now, let's pull up this tweet from Bilal, who's got in touch from London. If Afridi is a traitor, then the whole Pakistani government for the last 10 years are traitors as well, because they helped the US and the CIA too. Well, Aisha, you're with us from Lahore. Isn't that a reasonable point? The Pakistani government works with the Americans. This doctor was working with the Americans.
I think that's a very reasonable point. You have to understand that at the end of the day, most Pakistanis there is strong anti-Americanism towards in every Pakistani, but it's more so towards foreign policy towards Pakistan, and not so much necessarily towards America. I think that's a valid point brought up, and this is a very tricky relationship. It's a lot of things are used as bargain chips in this relationship, and you've seen those come off and on. Right now, the NATO supply line, that's a huge issue for U.S. and Pakistan that needs to be resolved in order to move forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's switch from Lahore to Karachi because we can bring in another guest now. Dr. Awab Alvi is with the Global Voices website. Sir, thanks for your time. Well, how did you react when you heard the doctor was going to be sentenced to 3 decades in prison?
I think the end does not justify the means. I mean, when you talk about his helping the war on terror, the issue is he acted as a spy within Pakistan. The laws, if in any country, signify that you cannot talk and engage in engagement with another foreign country and act as a spy within your country. By any laws, including the U.S. has a FARA Act, which is called the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which prohibits foreign nationals to act or help other countries without proper consent. So I believe whatever the Americans might believe, the war on terror, I agree, I'm against war on terror, but the fact that he helped a foreign country invade a country
Dr. Albi, I've got to jump in here because your Skype line's coming in and out. Let's try and fix that. But I get the general point that you're making. And I'd like to put that to you, Andrew, in Canada, because you're very passionate about what this man did. But if a Canadian or an American worked for the Pakistanis without telling their respective governments, you'd be furious.
Well, I think you're looking at 2 different points there, because the last time I checked, Canada and the U.S. have not been harboring the head of al-Qaeda. I think that we just heard from the guest is simply disgusting. I mean, it shows the complacency that we have in Pakistan from the Pakistanis towards the war on terror. I mean, you heard him say, oh, we support it. But yeah, no, he shouldn't have done anything. He shouldn't have stepped up against it. I think that Pakistan needs to be held accountable. And I think if you look at the reality here, they've been given over $20 billion in the last 10 years by the United States government. And as was said on the program a little bit earlier, what has the U.S. gotten in return for that? What has the West gotten in return? And what I think is that the United States should be involved in this to get this doctor out of here. I mean, I think when you're talking about a global war on terrorism, one that Pakistan has initially said they were going to help the United States with, they should not be prosecuting a man for trying to help in that battle. I think. Okay, well, Andrew,
let's put that point quickly to Dr. Alvi because he's back with us. Sir, do you feel that Pakistan and America are on the same side in the fight against militant Islam?
Well, all opinion polls, even in the U.S. and Pakistan, say they want an end to the war on terror. The dialogue should actually be how to stop the war on terror and get over with it. It's been 10 years and nothing has come out of it. And you're talking about a person and arresting a person. I don't think that the narrative is right. The narrative is he's a spy within Pakistan. He may have helped the war on terror, which 80% or 90% of Pakistanis do like the war on terror. Government might be doing something. This said has taken $20 billion, but the people of Pakistan has not.
I'm sorry, sir, I've got to interrupt. How frustrating. Your line is good, and then as you start talking to us, it fades away, which is a shame. I can see comments here from Pakistan, Nigeria, and Australia. I promise I'll read those just at the beginning of the next half hour of World Have Your Say. Do go online right now, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. We'll keep on talking in a couple of minutes' time. Let me introduce you to the 3 guests who are with us to carry on this conversation. Malu Innocent is with the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. We also have Aisha Chowdhury, a freelance journalist in Lahore, and we're hoping to bring in Andrew again, one of our guests in Canada. He's editor-in-chief of the Landmark Report, Andrew Lawton. And Andrew, I think some of our viewers would like to hear from you whether you would admit that you're applying one rule to America and one rule to the rest of the world.
You know, I think that when you're talking about a war where there's a very clear sense of who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, that's not an unfair label to put on. I think if we're looking at the 2 countries at face value, America and Pakistan, one of them has rights for gays, one of them has rights for women, one of them has rights of religious freedom, and it's not Pakistan that's guaranteeing those rights. I mean, Pakistan has a history of archaic blasphemy laws, imprisoning people for being gay. I mean, this is not a country that's preserving human rights. And I think clearly their usage of Sharia law and whatnot is showing that they're not an ally in the fight for freedom worldwide. And I think that's why America should get a little more support in the dispute between those two countries.
Adnan is following us in Lahore, tweeting, "Finding Osama Bin Laden in Pakistan was a shame for all of us. It is under judicial investigation and top to bottom must be punished." But as we've heard from Aleem Maqbool, the BBC's man in Pakistan, he's been pointing out, as has the BBC's Ola Guerin, that this doctor may be in prison, but no one has been charged or punished for assisting Bin Laden to remain in Abbottabad. And Faraz in the UAE tweets, "He's a traitor, and so he has been punished according to the laws of Pakistan." Malou, let's bring you in here. We've made much of the very difficult relationship between America and Pakistan recently. Do you think it would be actually useful if both acknowledged the time to work together has come to an end?
I think it's time to realize that USA doesn't buy America good favor or influence, and it also doesn't encourage the Pakistanis to go after the militants that we deem to be a threat to our interests within the region, especially within Afghanistan. In fact, when I first heard the news about the sentencing of Dr. Afridi, I wasn't terribly surprised, only because Islamabad and Washington have been papering over their differences for several years. In fact, since 9/11, they've been working at cross purposes in the war on terror. Again, they have aligned on certain issues and they've gone after certain militants. But at the same time, on the other hand, the Pakistanis and elements within its intelligence services have assisted the Afghan Taliban, or the Quetta Taliban, as some have called it, also the Hekmatyar network and the Haqqanis. So I think, we are working at cross purposes. We have very divergent interests and strategic perspectives on this region. And I think we've seen this time and time again in terms of these series of ruptures and scandals that have plagued the relationship. This is the Afridi affair is merely a symptom of a much deeper problem between the United States and Pakistan.
Malou, thank you very much indeed. Those of you watching, remember, we're always live here on World Have Your Say, and you're always welcome to speak to any of the guests who are taking part. So if any of them make a point and you think I'd like to respond to that, call us up, send us a tweet, a Facebook message or an email, and we'll put your point straight to them. They all know the deal when they come on the programme. They all know that the audience is likely to want to speak to them directly. The email is worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. Now let's bring in Adnan Ali. He's an entrepreneur in Lahore. Adnan, we spoke last night on World Have Your Say's radio edition, but for people who didn't hear that, tell us where you stand on this sentence and this conviction.
Thank you very much for having me here. First of all, I'd like to point out, my friend pointed out the archaic rules in Pakistan and the laws, but the US administration and critics are always cherry-picking the laws in Pakistan. When it comes to Raymond Davis, they were very happy to comply with Sharia law to get a known murder of 2 Pakistanis outside. So, I mean, we should not be cherry-picking the laws here. Where I stand on this issue is very much clear. For a spy who has been caught, there are only 2 ways forward. Either you turn him into a mole or you send him to jail. He knew very well what he was doing. He had no knowledge, and he has confessed that he did not know he was going after Osama Bin Laden. The only thing he confessed to was that he was working on CIA payroll. And let me point out that just recently, Ghulam Nabi Fai in the US, a US citizen, was arrested and convicted for being on ISI payroll. So I don't see any difference in this scenario. Yes, Osama Bin Laden was found in Pakistan. That's a big shame. And we need to solve our own problems. And we need to take care of these issues ourselves. There's a judicial investigation going on. The results will come forward. There's a huge debate in this country right now about the role of ISI and military. But
Adnan, just to interrupt you, I suppose the point here is, and Andrew, I'd put this to you, whether the watching world has faith in Pakistan's ability to investigate how Bin Laden was able to stay in Abbottabad. Andrew, do you have faith in it?
Not at all. I mean, to say that Pakistan needs to be left to its own devices to look after itself, well, clearly that worked out really well, given that Osama bin Laden was partying it up in downtown Abbottabad for God knows how long. I mean, if Pakistan had been more cooperative in the effort to fight Osama bin Laden, the effort to fight terror, and if Pakistan would start taking on human rights issues in their country, start taking on Sharia law, and not cherry-picking the laws like your guest just said, maybe the world would have a little more faith in Pakistan. But
well,
at this time,
Andrew, let's give Adnan a chance to respond. Adnan, why do you think the world should have faith in Pakistan's ability to investigate what happened with Bin Laden?
I think the world should have complete faith in Pakistan. They should, yes, we have our problems, but we need to work through them. Look at Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and thousands of Al-Qaeda people that have been either captured or killed from Pakistan by the Pakistani agencies working with CIA for sure, and look at all those people that have been arrested. A lot of evidence has been given right after Osama Bin Laden was killed. President Obama in his speech did mention Pakistan's support in that process. So I think there should be a two-way faith system going on there. Definitely the person talking earlier did say that we do work on cross-function, and US should understand that Pakistanis have their own national interest, and they will need to, they can't be a part of the fiefdom of US empire. So,
all right, so you're asking that people understand that Pakistan, as well as America, has its own national interests. I'm wondering, there's a lot of hostility towards Pakistan coming in on the messages. I can see Victor in Liberia saying the world should now consider Pakistan a country that supports terrorist activities rather than see it as a close ally. But I wonder if those of you watching do have some sympathy with the points that Adnan was making. Thanks for joining us from Lahore, Adnan. We appreciate that. Calls have come in the past few minutes from St. Lucia, Denmark, Sri Lanka, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Morocco and Japan. We're doing our best to get as many of your comments on the air as we possibly can. Thank you very much indeed for those. Let's quickly bring in Shahzadi, who's a British Pakistani barrister who's with World Have Your Say in London. You've been listening to a number of the points that are being made, Shahzadi. Is there one that you would like to respond to?
Yes, I think that a lot of the criticism that keeps coming out, particularly from the States, about Pakistan is that it needs to be made accountable. The big question is, when is the US going to be made accountable? Because we know that targeted assassinations are taking place on a weekly, sometimes a daily basis, which is against international law. It's an issue that keeps coming up, but it is not being properly addressed by the international community. And I have actually a great deal of sympathy with the points made by Adnan in relation to the fact that you cannot simply wipe the slate clean and say, well, we had a problem when it came to the killing of Osama Bin Laden, but actually we really want to ignore everything that's gone on in the last 10 years. And I think this is a point that perhaps Andrew in particular needs to take on board, that Pakistan has cooperated for a decade.
Well, let's quickly see if Andrew wants to take that point on board.
Well, I think to say that the Pakistan cooperated is a bit of a loaded statement, because I think there have been repeated examples that have been shown of when the Pakistani intelligence police was not fully forthright with U.S. intelligence when the U.S. thought they were being that way. So I don't think it's fair to say that they've been completely cooperative. At the same time, it's not fair to say they've been completely uncooperative.
All three of you, thank you very much indeed. We're coming up to a break, so we'll pause the conversation there. Someone calling themselves a good soldier has tweeted us from Pakistan saying the US punishes spies from Israel, so why can't we punish spies from America? And Talat, watching in Pakistan, says, yes, he did commit treason by assisting foreign forces. It's violated our sovereignty and it's compromised our national security. Thanks to all of you getting these messages in. We'll come back to more of them in a couple of minutes' time here live on BBC World News. Hi, I'm Ross Atkins. Thanks for joining me for today's World Have Your Say here on the BBC. We're discussing the conviction of a Pakistani doctor who helped the Americans find Osama Bin Laden. He's been convicted of treason and will now serve a very long prison sentence indeed. Let's keep talking about this with our three guests. Before I do, though, I want to bring in Jill again, who's with the World Have Your Say team, because we're being deluged with calls. Jill, I'm curious to know how people are responding as they're watching.
Just in Norway and Germany, and a lot of strong opinions being expressed on this topic. Some callers do have sympathy for Dr Afridi. Obeng in Ghana just called to say the President of the United States should rescue him if he can. He should do everything in his power to do so. But some supporting that prison term. Joseph just called, also from Ghana. He was saying he feels for Pakistan. This is something every country would do. He said, you cannot go against your own country regardless of the outcome. calls too from Pakistan. Zubair called from Islamabad to say, in general, the Pakistani people think he betrayed them by acting with a foreign security service. And Asim in Islamabad says, Americans should accept that there are laws in Pakistan that cannot be broken. He broke the law, so he must be punished. Nobody is above the law.
Jill, thanks very much. It's interesting. We were talking about this on BBC World Service Radio, and again, the majority of Pakistanis, even those of whom thought the Pakistan government hadn't done enough to catch Bin Laden, still feel this man betrayed their country. Now, let's talk again with Andrew Launton in Canada, Malou Innocent in Washington, D.C., and also Shahzadi Beg in London. All three of you, in your different ways, have described the parlous state of Pakistan-America relations at the moment. So I've got a question for you. What one thing might improve that relationship? Shahzadi, do you want to go first?
I think the key issue is that Pakistan needs a prominent place on the Afghan negotiating table. That is the single factor that I think is going to improve the relationship. Pakistan doesn't want to see civil war in Afghanistan, and it understands that any instability in Afghanistan will cause itself to be unstable. It will bring with it millions more refugees and more free-flowing arms. And I think that Pakistan has consistently tried to find itself a place, but for all the reasons that we've been talking about in this program, the relationship now is so bad, and we saw what happened at the Chicago summit, that this is the single factor, if you're asking about one factor, that could change the dynamics.
Malou, does that seem like a good idea to you?
I would agree with your guest from London. I think that Pakistan, for both good and bad, is a major stakeholder in Afghanistan and really in the broader region, especially when we talk about U.S.-India relations and Pakistan's own sort of interests within Kashmir. But I would also add cutting drone strikes, stopping the number of drone strikes within Pakistan. Certainly they have eliminated a number of high-level al-Qaeda militants, but at the same time they've further radicalized the state of Pakistan. It's been brought to very much a very volatile edge right now, and it's a nuclear-armed Muslim-majority state, and we do have a stake in Pakistan's future stability. And certainly right now, I think drone operations are more of a body count. They don't really address the underlying root causes that sort of bring Islamabad and Washington to loggerheads repeatedly. And
it's worth adding that within hours of Dr Shakeel Afridi's conviction, Pakistan was claiming that 8 people had been killed by a US drone strike. What about you, Andrew? What one thing do you think could improve relations?
Well, I think in the short term, the U.S. needs to make an effort to bring the doctor to safe ground. I think in the long term, I think if Pakistan wants to seriously be a player with the West and be an ally to the West, I think Pakistan needs to start making commitments to enforcing human rights in their own country, and I think that would go a long way in bringing Pakistan and the U.S. back to the table together as allies, which they have been, I think, up until that territory got a little murky in the last few years.
Do you agree with that, Shahzadi?
I think all of those points are very valid points. Pakistan's got a lot of internal problems which it certainly needs to address. The drone issue, which I talked about earlier, is a very, very sensitive issue. It's against international law. The Americans have consistently justified it. It's a very sensitive issue, and there are a number of lawsuits now in the pipeline directly resulting from the death of innocent people. So all of those issues, I think, are very, very important.
And we've got 1 minute left. We've heard 2 suggestions. Malou, I must make a bit of time to hear yours.
Well, I think also the Pakistanis must sort of look within themselves. What sort of country do they want to be? Right now, they not only have a PR and an image problem, but they've also been having they've had a history of assisting various militant groups, whether that be in Afghanistan or in Kashmir or as far away as Bosnia. So I think really the Pakistanis must look within themselves, sort of what country do they want to be, what sort of strategic interests they have in mind, and how they want to advance those interests. Because right now, it is sort of putting its own self into a corner against a lot of the rest of the world.
Malou, very good to have you on the programme again. Andrew, you too. Shahzadi, do come back on World Have Your Say. Thanks to all 3 of you. We're going to carry on this conversation on BBC World Service Radio. Jill's going to be hosting the show. You can listen to it live in 1 hour's time. It's streaming at bbcworldservice.com. We'll also put those links and our contact details on the Facebook page. Good to have your company today. Thanks for all your calls. I'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.